So let's talk about the tourist visa interview. Hi, I'm SohYoon Atac. I'm one of the attorneys with Adam Law Group. We plan to release weekly videos about the law, starting with immigration. And if you find that interesting, please subscribe. Let me give you some background first to help you better understand what the officers are looking for in your tourist visa interview. We're talking here about the B1/B2 temporary visitor for business or pleasure. So the B1 part is about visitor for business, which we'll cover in a separate video. And the B2 is the temporary visitor for pleasure. Now, even within the B2, there are some other purposes, such as medical treatment or accompanying someone with a certain non-immigrant visa. But here we'll focus on the typical tourist visa. Now, this is the most discretionary visa category out there. So the interview and decision take typically just minutes, probably under 10 most likely. And that includes a time the officers will interview your information on the screen as you're walking up to the window. So they do this all the time, and it really doesn't take them much time to see certain red flags, within that consular system. So in the interview, the officer must believe that you won't violate the terms and conditions of your tourist visa. So what does that mean? They're really focusing on a couple main points. The first is, are you really going to leave the US on time and not stay there? So we call that immigrant intent. So the officers by regulation actually presume that you have immigrant intent, and it's your job through the interview to convince them that you actually do not have immigrant intent and that you will be there temporarily and then leave the United States. The other point that they really focus on is, are you going to work in the United States without permission? So we call that unauthorized work. So again, you need to convince the officers that you have no intention and will not be working without authorization while you're visiting the United States. So with the framework used by the officers in mind, let's talk about the most common questions and issues. I'll include some examples that some have found surprising. And even if a particular example doesn't apply directly to you, it should give you a better understanding of this framework and how that can play out in your tourist visa interview. So, what is the purpose of your visit? What's the reason for going to the United States? Why do you want to visit the US? So, some question like that will certainly be asked. And obviously, you're going for a touristic purpose. So here, you don't want to just say that. You want to give a short answer with some specifics. For example, I'm going to take a tour of the Grand Canyon, Disney World, Nashville, whatever it is. Or something like, I'm going to visit my friend, sister, or to spend time with my daughter and her family. Again, whatever your situation is. In your purpose, there are some red flags that may be raised. And for example, if you're visiting a significant other, like your boyfriend, girlfriend, or lover, then that raises concerns immediately, typically in the officer's mind, that you may actually have immigrant intent. That, like we discussed, that you won't leave the US once you're done with your trip, but that you'll end up staying there and then work to become a permanent resident or immigrate to the United States. Now, if you say something like, to visit my fiance or spouse, then that's probably even a stronger concern for immigrant intent. And especially if your fiance or spouse has filed a petition for you already, then that's probably even tougher. And for that situation, please see our other video where we discuss that specifically. Now, those are probably obvious red flags. And if you're in that situation, you really need to have very strong documentation and an explanation as to why you have strong ties in your home country and why this is definitely going to be a temporary trip. And it could be something like, our relationship is not there yet, to I'm finishing up my last semester of college, or whatever it might be, but you want to have as much as you can good explanation and documentation. Now, an unexpected red flag example I'll give is, let's say your answer is something like, my purpose, I'm going to see my new grandchild, my new grandbaby, to help my daughter with the new baby. So, or this could be, a friend's or a family member, like son, daughter, sister, cousins, new baby, something like that. Now, a lot of people think, isn't this a perfect reason? Of course, it makes perfect sense. I'm going to go get to see the baby, be with my family or friend. And of course, I'm not just going to sit there. I'm going to try to be helpful and help out. And here, believe it or not, this actually raises a concern for consular officers because this can be a potential for unauthorized work. Now, you might be like, what? I'm not being paid. I'm not going to work. I'm going to be a good friend or a good family member. But unfortunately, in the United States, unauthorized work doesn't have much to do with whether you're actually paid or not. And if, the officer can think, oh, if you weren't there, there would be more job opportunities for the U.S. citizen or work authorized person, such as the family would need daycare or a nanny or babysitter or use some service, or they would need help with housework. And those would be job opportunities. Then they could actually have this concern. And there have been people, believe it or not, that have been denied because of this concern. So now in this situation, it's really important to explain and carefully emphasize the fact that you're actually going to spend time with your dear friend or family member. And now, incident to that, could you possibly cook a meal or help out or, help with the baby? I mean, of course, that's normal. But the emphasis can't be, as some people have done before, oh, they really need me. If you don't give me my visa and I don't go there, they won't be able to handle it because they need help with all this stuff. That is not the way to go. You want to emphasize the fact that you're actually visiting your friend, and that is really the main purpose. Now, kind of along these veins, it's also very common to be asked, do you have family in the US? And again, this can be a double-edged sword. Now, of course, if you have family in the US, it makes sense to visit them. That'll be a very good purpose. But you also want to be careful that it doesn't raise concerns that it's an easy way for you to then stay and have immigrant intent and not depart the US on time. So again, these are all, the facts aren't bad, but you want to be careful that you don't give an unnecessary impression that you have immigrant intent. Another question is, how long will you be in the US? Or how long are you staying? And follow-ups like, why are you staying so long? So if there are questions like that, obviously your answer has to make sense based on the purpose of your visit that you just shared. And here, if you're unsure or you're flexible at timing, I would probably suggest going with a shorter number of days because you are absolutely allowed to change your plans of how long you stay, so long as you remain within the allowed time, the terms and conditions of your tourist visa entry. And unless there's a problem, the CBP or the customs officer should let you in for 6 months. So here, obviously, give your intended period of stay and have an explanation that, makes sense with the purpose of your visit. But when in doubt, probably, don't be like, I may stay 2 to 4 weeks, so I must say 4 weeks for sure, because I can't change my mind. So it's not like that. Another question is, have you been to the US before? Now, they already know the answer to this question. So, as always, you should, give the answer truthfully. And if you have a positive record of travels to the US and leaving on time, then that certainly would be a positive factor for you. Yeah, at the same time, I would say don't rely entirely on the fact that you have had a previous maybe 10-year multiple entry tourist visa and you've had a good track record of using it. Because, for example, there was someone who had just that. And they went in thinking, oh, this is no big deal. I've had no issues in the past. And then that person was actually denied. And the consular section chief was nice enough to even correspond with me, which he didn't have to. And I learned that there was something that came up in his record from his home country that didn't show up before. But I think with improved technology and information sharing agreements, there was something. And it's not like this person was a criminal or anything like that, but something in his record, that didn't show up before, but that was now available to the consulate, and that caused an issue, which we had to work through. So good for you if you had previous tourist visas, I think that's certainly a great place to, be, but you can't just rely on that either. So another question or some version thereof that I'll be asked is, will you come back after you visit? Or how can you assure me that you'll not stay in the US? Or maybe questions directly about your ties to your home country, such as your job, family, responsibilities, etc. Here, again, this is definitely hitting that notion of immigrant intent, as well as the unauthorized work, but in particular that immigrant intent. So you really want to have and be able to show strong ties to your home country. So in your verbal responses, as well as in your documentation. So that could include things like information about your work, perhaps an employer letter that shows that you have vacation time and that you're expected back at work on X date. Or information about property that you own. So ownership or tax documents. It could be about your home or other real estate or other assets that you have. Or other information about responsibilities that you have, especially about dependents like children or elderly parents that rely on you to take care of them. Now, as I've mentioned in a different video, you would think leaving like little minor children of yours behind would be absolute foolproof evidence that you do not have immigrant intent, that you will come back. But in reality, that's not the case. It's certainly great evidence, but it's not the end all be all, because sadly, people often do leave their children behind and then end up immigrating to the United States. So just to keep that in mind. Another question that's asked is, they might ask you directly, are you going to work in the US? And obviously the answer is no, because that is not allowed under the tourist entry. And they might ask questions like, then how will you pay for your trip? And here, this is where you bring up your financial standing, and you could have documentation of your finances, such as bank statements or earning statements or evidence of other assets that would show that you can support the costs of your trip to the United States. Now, for many of you, the answer may be, oh, I'm going to visit my friend or family and they're going to support me while I'm there, or they're going to help out. So in that case, it's advisable to have an invitation letter from that family member or that friend or acquaintance or whoever that is. Now, this is where you also have to be very careful, because sometimes I've seen invitation letters that are, very zealous about, please give the tourist visa because we miss so-and-so so much and they're welcome to our home at any time as long as they want, and things like that. And, actually that can have the opposite effect of, instead of being helpful, that might raise concerns of immigrant intent, that this potential tourist has a place to go and stay, so they aren't as needing to leave the country, for example. So again, when you have an invitation letter, you want to make sure that, of course, it states the fact that you'll be staying, but you'll be visiting for a specific amount of time from this date to this date, and and what you guys will be doing. And in fact, it might even be helpful to say something like, this is a good time because the host, either took time off work, or this is when their house is available, and, something like that. So again, keep in mind that things that seem great can be seen differently by the officer when they're looking at it through that framework of potential immigrant intent and unauthorized work. So really, what the interview comes down to is your credibility. And so the officer has to believe that you are telling the truth. Now, to help with establishing your credibility, first of all, tell the truth. This is pretty obvious, but, and it sounds crazy, but some people go to the B2 tourist visa interview with fake documents and tell lies. And that is never worth it. And sometimes well-meaning people, get coached to say certain things or to use a script that actually isn't appropriate to their situation. So if you've been advised that way, that's the only way you can get a tourist visa, it's not worth it. Don't do it. Just tell the truth. Also, you really want to be consistent in everything you do in this process. So that goes from the DS form that you submit initially to the consulate, to the supporting documents that you bring, to the verbal answers you provide. And remember, they know a bunch of the answers to the questions they're asking. So make sure that you're consistent, and you can make sure you are consistent by preparing and reviewing the information and avoiding careless mistakes where you just like, I don't know, write the wrong street or something, and then it turns out to be inconsistent. Now, let's say something's actually changed. Then you really want to have evidence to back that up and be able to explain it. So this could be something like when you turned in your DS form, you had a certain job, but by the time the interview rolled around, maybe you took a second job or you changed positions, and that's okay. Just make sure that you have evidence and a good explanation. Remember to answer clearly and concisely only what's asked. The interview is not very long, and the officers are busy, so let them conduct the interview. You don't need to try to win them over with small talk. That would be very ill-advised. And along those lines, you should definitely go prepared with all the supporting documents you need, especially showing your ties to your home country, that you're very strong ties to your home country, as well as the fact that you will not engage in unauthorized work because you have the financial ability to support your trip. All those documents are important, but don't provide it unless it's actually needed. Go with it prepared, but don't feel like I prepared it all. I want the officer to look at it. That's not how it works. So just have it ready in case you need it. Also, if you don't know the answer to a question, don't guess. And don't worry. It's not a crime not to know something. And sometimes the officers can ask questions to throw you off or cause some discomfort. And part of it is can be a tool to catch people who are either lying or committing fraud. So don't feel like if you don't know an answer, like it's all over. That's okay. Take a breath and do your best. I hope this gives you a better idea of the main underlying concerns the officers have in a tourist visa interview. So that of immigrant intent, unauthorized work, and of course, your credibility. You can't just memorize a generic script to prepare for this, because the nature and feel of the interview, as well as the specific questions asked, are very dependent on the intersection of these underlying concerns with your specific facts. And in fact, with some factors that are beyond your control, such as even the rate of immigration violations in your country. So no matter what wording the officer uses or what specific questions are thrown at you, hopefully with this framework in mind, you can just be yourself, your attentive and polite self, and have a successful tourist visa interview. I really hope you get to visit the United States, whether to see people you know or to just come and explore or meet new people, because it's one country, but as you know, it is humongous. There are 50 states, and there's just so much to see and do. If you found this helpful, please subscribe. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks.